Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo! It is time to explore a road less traveled. The mighty Columbia River, as it stretches from Hermiston and Umatilla over to Portland. Some of us remember when there was a small highway that took all day and sometimes two to drive to Portland. Now we have a freeway and can easily do the drive in 8 or 9 hours. While we are driving the freeway, we look across to the Washington side and we see a small road over there. It is that road that we will be exploring in the next couple of weeks. On last week's show, we began our journey in Beaverton, and as we were coming back on Freeway 205, we stopped across from Oregon City in a small turnout where you can check out Willamette Falls. What a beautiful falls this is, with a very interesting history. We then got back on Interstate Highway 84, heading toward Boise. We enjoyed the beautiful Columbia River Gorge, where the Columbia River goes through the Cascade Mountain Range. We got excited as we passed some of the more than 100 trains a day that go through this gorge, both on the north and south side of the Columbia River. We continued our journey past Cascade Locks, where Bonneville Dam is, and at Hood River, we stopped and had a lovely dinner. While we were dining, we had a very nice view of the bridge we will be taking across the Columbia River over to Washington and Highway 14. We finished up our last adventure on a road less traveled by going across the bridge and enjoying a few sights as we drove toward the east on the Washington side of the river. It's a lovely drive, certainly a change from driving the freeways. The highway on the Washington side has two features to enjoy that you don't get driving the freeway. For one thing, it goes up and down the hills more, and so therefore you get more vistas. And since you're traveling at a slower rate of speed, you can pull off into the, I don't know, what is it, 6, 8, a dozen great little historic pull-off sites that Washington has built on this side of the river. My friend Harold and I came to really appreciate these great little diversions. One of the interpretive signs explains those 100 trains a day that come through the Columbia River Gorge. But trains are not the only thing carrying freight through the gorge. There are barges, boxcars, and 18-wheelers. The major port supplied by the Columbia River Gorge is the Port of Portland. The Port of Portland is the third largest auto importer into the United States. That's why you see trains carrying automobiles going through southern Idaho. As far as exports go, a full 40% of the wheat that is exported from the United States goes through the Columbia River Gorge. In fact, the Port of Portland is the largest wheat exporter from the United States, and it is the third largest wheat exporter in the world. Overall, the Port of Portland is the 5th largest port for tonnage in the United States, the 3rd largest bulk mineral port in the United States, and the 17th largest port for shipping containers. These products come from many places. The wheat largely comes from the great grain states of the Midwest. Products that go through the Columbia River Gorge on barges, boxcars, and 18-wheelers that are produced in the Pacific Northwest include grains, hay cubes, bulk legumes, paper products, and that all-American product that is in demand all over the world, frozen French fried potatoes. We are all familiar with the big metal containers that make it standard for shipping things by either ship, rail, or 18-wheeler. According to the interpretive sign at this little Washington State pullout alongside the highway, producers of frozen French fries in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington fill refrigerated containers up with about 6,831,000 French fries for each of those containers. Needless to say, these containers are refrigerated, and they are sent throughout the world. They literally fill entire ships. What I don't understand is why they can't be more accurate with the count. On our last road less traveled, we left the first of these little way stations that show you the history of the area, and we promised to head toward Maryhill Museum and Stonehenge. However, my friend and I got distracted. We got distracted at Wisram, and before that, we got distracted at another little historic turnoff from Highway 14 that talked about Celilo Falls. Here is a little panorama of where we pulled off and became entranced with this unique spot on the Columbia River. Here we are looking across the river at the freeway and railroad on the Oregon side of the river. Today, Celilo Falls is a lake, a backwater from the Dalles Dam. When Lewis and Clark were floating down the Columbia River, it was quite another matter. In 1805, Lewis and Clark called this the Great Falls of the Columbia River. Little did they know they had just started. It took Lewis and Clark several days to carry most of their supplies by horseback around these falls, and then they tied their canoes up with very strong elk hide ropes that had been braided, and they ported the canoes through the falls. They lost one of them, and the Indians recovered it on the shore on the far side. I knew Celilo Falls had been an important fishing spot for many, many years before recorded history. In the 1950s, my family had taken several trips on this old road, the old Highway 30, before it became a freeway. The Dalles Dam was not yet a reality. We used to stop and see these fishermen doing their fishing at the falls. What I did not know about Celilo Falls was that for centuries and centuries, it had been the central trading spot of the entire West Coast. Tribes from all over the western coast of the continent came to Celilo to trade different goods. In fact, what Lewis and Clark called the Great Falls of the Columbia was called by an Indian name that meant echo of falling water or sound of water upon the rocks. It was the same word referring to the same spot by many different tribes from California to Alaska. Celilo was such an important trade center that archaeological research has shown that Celilo is the oldest continuously inhabited community on the North American continent. The community was inhabited for 15,000 years. That's 13,000 years before Christ and some 12,000 years before Moses. It's even 10,000 years before the building of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. The only reason Celilo is not inhabited today is because in 1957, the Dalles Dam put it underwater. It was the end of 15,000 years of human history. Celilo Falls was the first of several great cataracts that the Lewis and Clark expedition found through this short stretch of river. Celilo Falls was just downstream or just west of modern-day Wishram. It is 9 miles downriver from Maryhill on the Washington side of the river and Biggs on the Oregon side of the river. For 12 miles, different falls and great rapids interrupted the flow of the river in a series of cataracts that were generally lumped into what were called the Dalles or the Narrows. These different areas of churning water were known by many names, but generally the areas are the Celilo Falls, the Short Narrows, the Long Narrows, and the Dalles. To get a better sense of where these cataracts were located, let's look at this 1935 overlay of the river. This is an aerial photograph of the river taken by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers before the construction of the Dalles Dam. In this overview, we can see Celilo Falls, the Short Narrows, the Long Narrows, and the rapids known as the Dalles were a little further down the river. Let's just pause a minute and take a little closer look. Depending on whether it was springtime with high water or in the fall with low water, the total drop during this 12 miles was either 82 feet during high water, about the same as an 8-story building, or 62 feet during low water, about this height of a 6-story building. At Celilo Falls, the river narrows. Before this spot, the river has been as wide as over a mile. As it comes into this 12-mile stretch of narrows, it is crowded down to less than 140 feet. By volume of water, the water going through Celilo Falls is the 6th largest falls in the world. There are larger rivers, but not going over falls. The average water at Celilo Falls was twice that of Niagara. Niagara flows about 2,400 cubic meters a second, Celilo about 5,400. Folks, I've seen Niagara Falls. To think of twice that much water coming over Celilo Falls on the Columbia River is quite astounding to me. My skepticism about that much water got me thinking about, what does the Columbia River flow? Well, the Columbia River averages 190,000 cubic feet a second. Now, this is more toward the mouth after the Willamette River has come into the river. What's going over Celilo Falls would be less. By comparison, the Snake River flows 56,900 cubic feet a second. The Snake River is the largest single tributary to the Columbia River. The second largest is the Willamette River, which carries about 37,000 cubic feet per second. The highest recorded flow on the Columbia River is 1,240,000 cubic feet per second. That is 6.5 times the average flow. I knew the Columbia River was a mighty river. It does drain a very wet area of the country. It did, however, catch me by surprise to find out that the Columbia River, at its very lowest flow during a drought year, about equals the flow of the Colorado River when it is in a very high flood stage. So even without the Willamette River, the Columbia is running about 150,000 cubic feet per second on average at Celilo Falls. At low water, the Celilo Falls has a 20-foot fall. At high water, it is completely submerged. The difference between the height of the water at low water and high water is 62 feet. That is a 6-story building added to the top of what was already going over the falls. About the first Westerner to see and describe Celilo Falls was Alexander Ross. Alexander was born in 1783 and he died in 1856. By the early 1800s, Alexander found himself a fur trader working for John Jacob Astor's Pacific Fur Company. In 1811, Alexander Ross was part of a party out looking for more places to catch beavers and other furs. In 1811, his party landed at what is now Astoria, Oregon, and Alexander took part in founding of Fort Astoria. Fort Astoria was the first American-owned settlement on the Pacific coast. It was only owned for 2 years by the Americans, however. It was difficult to maintain that far away, and the Pacific Fur Company sold the fort to the British-owned Northwest Company in 1813. The Northwest Company changed the name of the fort to Fort George and ran it for 33 years. Just as Fort Astoria had been the first American-owned settlement on the Pacific coast, Fort George was the first British port on the Pacific coast. But let's return to Alexander Ross. Shortly after Fort Astoria was established in 1811, Alexander Ross went exploring the Columbia River. He found this great cataract with the water splashing over. He wrote in his journal, "The water rushes with great impetuosity. The foaming surges dash through the rocks with terrific violence. No craft, either large or small, can venture there safely." Alexander's notes continue, "During floods, this obstruction or ledge of rocks is covered with water. This ledge of rocks is 40 feet tall. If floods mean that the water rises another 62 feet, as my research has revealed, it means that the water would be coming over from further up than the photograph shows. It literally would wipe out the falls and just have a foaming mass of water running over it. Even so, Alexander Ross continues, yet the passage of the Narrows is not thereby improved. I'll bet it wasn't. I don't think that I would be taking my canoe through there, whether you could see much of the falls or not. The Celilo Falls pullout in Washington tells all kinds of interesting history. For one thing, there is an excellent plaque showing the route that Lewis and Clark took as their expedition went down the Snake River and Columbia River to the ocean in 1805, and then in 1806 came eastward getting horses to go over the hills. The return journey was made in the spring. On April 22nd, 1806, William Clark climbed to the top of Haystack Butte, which is at this location just north of Celilo Falls. While there, he took out his telescope and checked out the Cascade Range for as far as he could see. He also saw Mount Jefferson, which the party had seen first on March 30th, 1806, as they were coming back up the river. They had named the snow-covered peak after President Thomas Jefferson, who had sent them on their expedition. What a great little stop on the side of the road. Harold and I were certainly glad that we took the time to check it out. Little had we suspected about the phenomenal history that lay exposed before us, buried under a man-made sea. And then it was time to get back on lovely Highway 14. Before long, we found ourselves distracted by this little sign, and we turned off the road toward a little town we had never really heard about called Wishram. We'll take a quick little look at Wishram next time on A Road Less Traveled. Now available from your beer drinking guide to the Great Wahoo, you can get DVD movies made up from different stories that have been shown here on the Great Wahoo. So far, there are 4 different DVDs with 7 different movies. You can check out the world's 2 greatest river floods, both of which happened right here in Idaho. If that seems like a tall order to fulfill, there is a short 11-minute movie that looks into the claims that these are the biggest floods that have ever happened in the geologic history of the Earth. Another DVD looks at driving around the Albions and through the City of Rocks, as well as having a movie on the Boise Kelton stage. This stage was pulled by galloping horses night and day for 40 hours. It was quick, but can you imagine being behind galloping horses with all of the dust and being thrown around on a rough ride for 40 hours? Egad! Of Pooh, You, and the Great Wahoo, is a 1.5-hour movie that gives an extensive look at how we turn sewage into river water. In 24 hours, what you flushed becomes swimmable and fishable. And there is a DVD with two 40-minute movies about Boise High, about building the old campus and heating it, and the renovation that they did in the 1990s. Your beer drinking guide also has two books out. One, 104 pages on building, heating, and remodeling Boise High, as well as a 13-page booklet on Boise geothermal development. These books are rich in historic and contemporary photographs. Also available on DVD are copies of your own favorite shows, or if there was some story that was serialized on several different Great Wahoos, I can take those different segments of the story and put them on a DVD for you. For more information on these movies, these books, or these services, check out my website, www.greatwahoo.com, and feel free to send me an email at beerdrinker@greatwahoo.com. No one was more proud and proper and proud of their demeanor than Matilda, and nowhere was she more proud of her demeanor than at church. She was a proper church lady, and over the years, she became one of the church's true matrons. She didn't put up with any funny business from anybody. But of course, Matilda aged, and she became a real sweetheart of a little old lady. Everyone loved her, and of course, she stayed Matilda. When she was at church, she was proper and she was proud. One day, in the middle of the service, she passed her husband a little note. It read, "Oh dear, I passed some silent gas. What do you think I should do?" Her husband jotted down a quick little note and passed it back. It read, "Well, sweetie, first I think you ought to change the batteries in your hearing aid." And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo.